So, and now we will listen Armands. Here you come.
Okay. Thank you. And my name is Armands. My business card says that I'm a solutions architect. I don't know what the hell that means, but here you go. So if you're interested, here's my Twitter account. Here's my SlideShare account. So these slides will also be there. So no need to write anything down. If you have any questions, feel free to shout them out at any moment that you wish, because I think it's more comfortable than to wait for afterwards. But of course, if you're shy and stuff like that, then just go ahead and wait. So I was actually thinking, I was giving a similar talk in Riga about Kanban and why I opted to choose Kanban in some of my projects. And that was a really hard topic because it's everyday operations for me, and there's nothing really interesting I can say about everyday stuff. So you go to work, you go home, and stuff like that. But I kind of try to alter this talk a little to hopefully suit this crowd. So I was here last year, and there were a lot of Agile novices. Vaidas asked the question beforehand, how many of you are considered not knowing a lot about Agile? And I will ask the same question right now because I need to know how to adjust my speech. So how many of you are not very familiar with Agile practices? Okay, so probably the right crowd. So again, if I'm going too much into detail or too much on a high level, just shout out and I will try to kind of to alter my speech, alter my talk again. So my talk will be divided more or less into two parts. So why I use Kanban and why I use Scrum, the reasoning why I chose to do that, and how I actually do it using Jira, because I don't really like this huge whiteboards and stuff where you put the notes on, because if you have a distributed team, then it just doesn't work. And if you don't have a distributed team and your team is as lazy as mine, then usually you are the one that ends up writing all the stuff and just putting it on the whiteboard and moving it all around. So I don't like to do work. I just like to kind of think about the ideas. So I will also try to tell you about some cases that I've encountered, because I feel that it's more interesting to listen about real life stories actually than just theory. So here we go. I was about 8 years ago. I was working then in a company called Tieto Latvia, and as I told in my lightning speech, Scrum was all the rage then. So it doesn't matter if it fitted the project. If it didn't fit the project, you just had to do Scrum, because it showed results in some projects. So it was my first project as a project manager, and just a little background info. So the area was utilities. It was size of the team varied from about 7 to 30 at one point, but mostly it was 15 plus people. And first we did development, and then we transferred to maintenance. And when I went into the project, it was still in development phase, and it was a nightmare project actually. So it was over budget, over time. Nobody knew what anything worked, if anything worked at all. And I think 2 weeks before our first schedule that we were going to go to production, it was a billing system. We couldn't do billing at all. So it was really bad. And so when I came into that specific project, and more or less it's my attitude in all projects I go in as a project manager, at first I was suspicious. So I was trying to understand what's actually going on, what are those people doing, why isn't anything working? And then you kind of get the realization of what's actually happening in your project. And it's bad. Usually it's really bad, because how many developers are here? Not many. Have you ever looked at another guy's code and said, yeah, that's excellent, no mistakes, I couldn't have written it better? Okay, anyone else? When I was coding, I always looked at the piece of code and what bullshit. I could have written it a lot better. So with project managers, I think it's more or less the same. So when you go into project, doesn't matter how good it is, you also think that you can do better. So, and then of course, you're in that situation and you need to change stuff up to kind of, to save your project basically. And then you do something. In my case, we implemented Scrum and I was happy. Of course, I was happy to a certain moment when I realized that, again, something is probably not working. In my case, it was a situation when we transferred from development to maintenance, and I will tell about that in a bit more detail later. So, how many of you know about Scrum? Do I need to kind of describe this picture in detail or not? Yes, no, maybe. No, okay, everybody knows about Scrum. Scrum just works, stuff like that. How many of you know about Kanban? Okay, should I tell a bit more about Kanban? Okay, excellent. So Kanban comes from Toyota. Toyota is a lot of things, a lot of good things come from there. So it means visual card. So it means one of those, kan I think means card and ban means visual, or the other way around. So origins are in Toyota production system, and it's really, really simple. So you just have 3 principles. So you have to visualize the workflow, and this helps you to deal with bottlenecks or with pacing cars, as I found out it's called right nowadays. So you need to limit work in progress, and you need to manage the flow when you actually see that's what's wrong there. So is this familiar to you? It sort of looks like a Scrum board, but basically the main difference between Scrum board and a Kanban board, it's called Kanban board, is that you try to map as much of a workflow as you can, or as much as needed. So you also map, for example, steps from basically from the very beginning to when it's deployed into production in software case. And another big difference is that you actually limit work in process, which is this one, which in Kanban terms is considered waste. It's the same as the dead inventory or stuff like that. But basically, it's something that you do. And usually, I'm amazed at how many terms people think for just common sense. Because usually, when you work, you just do one thing. And if you need to do another thing, you put it aside and do another thing. And between there are complex kind of neurological reactions like context switching, and you need to understand what you've been doing, you need to remember what you've been doing before, and so on and so on. So it's a common sense that one person can do just one thing at one time. Not always so in software projects, because many times I see that you go to a developer and you ask on what are you working on, and he will say like 5, 7, 10 different things, like I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm doing that. I'm asking what are you doing at the moment? Well, I'm talking to you at the moment. But basically, it seems like common sense, but it's not always. So you need to limit work in progress, because if you want to understand what's actually being done at the moment. And this can help you decide on priorities. This can help you see the actual flow, what's going on, and so on. So, any questions about Kanban? Is it clear, more or less? No. Okay. I will recommend this book. This is actually a really good book. You can read it. It's available free online, actually, and later in the slides there's a link to it. So if you're not sure about Scrum and you're not sure about Kanban, then read this book. Why I put this book in these slides is actually because I really like when I do something and then I read that what I've done is actually right. So first I've done it, then I read this book and I realized, yeah, that somebody described it in a book. I'm a smart guy. I thought of it independently. But in the first few pages of this book, there's a dialogue between a consultant, I assume, and a guy that works in a company that implemented Scrum. And basically that dialogue is what was going on in my head when we switched to from development to maintenance. So basically what was going on? So in development, Scrum worked perfectly because we could set our own timelines, we knew the work that needed to be done, and we just needed to work. So basically we had the product backlog and we knew what we were going to do this week. We sort of knew what we needed to do this month, and we kind of had a vague idea of what the client wanted at the end of the project. But when you switch to maintenance, of course, you have some change requests which you can plan. But there's the kind of problems with issues coming in, with bugs. And you cannot plan that. And this was my biggest kind of problem as a really new project manager and really novice to Agile, to understand that that Scrum is not really working for maintenance projects. Because from my previous experience, as I was told, Scrum always works. Scrum always works great, and it was working also for me in maintenance. So I was kind of puzzled until I realized that those are two different processes, and I cannot plan bugs coming in. Otherwise, they wouldn't be bugs, they would be planned work of some sort. And I could not commit to any work because I did not know amount of work that will be required from me. And this led to me saying that I hate Scrum, it doesn't work, it doesn't produce the results, and well, I don't know what to do. And then, of course, I sat down and I realized that I have a problem and I need to come up with a solution. So then I kind of remembered my training from when I was studying logistics, and I remembered about Kanban. And it kind of seemed to put the maintenance stuff into place. So you have basically stuff coming in, and you do it one item at a time. So explaining a little bit in more depth about Kanban, imagine a big conveyor belt where everyone is doing their own job and you do just one item at a time, and you cannot take another item, or one item at a time in my case, but basically it's a limited amount of items. You cannot do more than one item at a time, and when you're done and somebody takes that item from you, so it's a pull system, not a push system, then you can take another item. So basically what, in that case, you can see that, for example, I don't know, as we discovered earlier in the talks, that developer is no longer a bottleneck, so he keeps pushing everything to testing, and there's this poor tester sitting with, I don't know, 20 new features that need to be tested by the end of the day. And nobody actually knows why, and instead of helping the tester, developer just develops the new feature and pushes it back to the tester. And so the Kanban kind of limits this whole flow and helps to not only to target specific area, but to manage the whole flow of how it works. So typical maintenance project, in my opinion, looks sort of like this. So you have the senior developer, the junior developer. There's probably some sort of sexy testers there. This is the automation guy. And yeah, this probably is the project manager. So typical maintenance project basically more or less usually does two things. So it's maintenance and it's changes. So some guys fix the code, some guys or girls do the changes. And these are two, as I mentioned earlier, two very different workflows. So one is more suited, maintenance is more suited for Kanban, and changes are more suited for Scrum, because you can plan changes and you cannot plan your maintenance work. So in maintenance, you take your bugs or something like that as they come, And in changes, you can plan ahead and commit to the client and say that you will do X amount of work in a week or in your sprint. So just for those guys that didn't understand the kind of essence of Kanban, just to make it more complicated for you, if you combine Scrum and Kanban, you get Scrumban. It looks sort of like this. Just to go through it, so you still have some sort of board, or either electronic or on your wall. You still have some sort of features or items that you need to develop. You add those to feature list, and then it just goes through the process. You still have product owner, in my case, Scrum Master, and the team. So it's these two processes, Kanban and Scrum combined. So if you can manage if you have a large team, it would be good to split it into two halves or two fractions rather, where one part is working on development and the other part is working on maintenance. If you have a small team, like my next example, which is fairly recent and that's why I chose it, I split people just by time. I allocate some amount of work to changes because those are planned, and then the rest of the time they are free to either do maintenance or do whatever. So since it's a mature team, they usually do the maintenance rather than whatever. So any questions about this excellent picture? No, thought so. Okay, so have a drink before I move on to next one. So this is a second case that a project that I'm actually currently working on, and I chose this for one simple reason. I wanted to give you kind of more down-to-earth view of what's actually being done in the project, and I have kind of screenshots from Jira just to show you how I manage it using the tools. So it's not, I don't know, particularly interesting project or stuff like that, but yeah, it's fairly interesting. But basically the area is logistics. So we have quite a small team, it's just 7 people. We are in maintenance for God knows how many years now. And when I started managing this project, there were several problems as you would expect. So there were no processes to speak of whatsoever. So the workflow was just guys from client side either calling or Skyping or emailing the developers, and they would do whatever they felt to do, not to get screamed at. So basically, whoever screamed the most got their first priority in the queue. So if that sounds familiar, really bad. So that led to guys not being able to predict their amount of work. So basically, if that person screams, I will go there and do that sort of work, and the person that was screaming the most previously will be left behind. So nobody understood what's actually going on in the project because emails were coming in every 5 or 10 minutes, and guys would change their priorities. And so yeah. It was quite a mess. So what I opted for is again just to clear everything up. I usually try to do a template or something like that on the project. So I usually put I don't know, issue tracking system in place. I usually put version control into place. I usually implement some sort of project management practices, try to do test-driven development, or at least run some automated tests and stuff like that. And usually it kind of solves the problem, and then you try to tweak these processes according to specific project needs. So maybe you don't, I don't know, for example, in Scrum, I rarely use burn down charts when the project is mature because you can see what's happening there. If in this case we don't do test-driven development or test automation because the system is many years in production, and cover everything with automated tests would take huge amounts of time and it wouldn't pay off. So you need to you need to kind of tweak the stuff. But yeah, and there are also some tools that I really like to use. And there's one tool that I like to use in particular, and it's Jira. I'm not affiliated with Jira in any way, so if you use Redmine, it also works for Redmine. If you use any more or less advanced issue tracking system, this usually works with that specific system. Why I like Jira? Because I work with it the most. The only issue that's, the only problem with Jira, and this is the shameless self-promotion bit, is that it doesn't have real-time SLA measurements. And if you're interested into those, we've actually developed in my company a tool called Sladiator, which gives real-time monitoring of SLA breaches or warnings regarding the SLA. It also gives reporting, taking into account business hours and so on. So if you're interested in that, go visit that link, and you will be pleased to know that it's completely scientist approved. So check it out. Self-promotion over. So going back to Jira. So since I don't like to use a lot of tools, I feel that they usually get in the way of doing the actual work. I really try to keep the tool set to a minimum. So instead of using kind of real walls and sticky notes, I put everything into the system because basically I can, at any time, I can look at it from any place, basically from client's office, from a plane, from whatever. So I have, this is just using standard possibilities in Jira. So if you're, just to show you the way how I organize stuff with Kanban and with Scrum differently. So I've put a couple of dashboards up, and the first one is general overview. So this is where I kind of see what's planned in our current sprint. So the bottom half is development stuff, so change requests, where there's work that we are actually committed to. So this gets filled in at the beginning of every sprint. We do planning poker. We see how much work we can do, and just add it to this filter so all interested parties know what's actually going on. So their developers can anytime look at it. Client can look at it. I don't know, client CEO can look at it, I can look at it. So everybody knows what's actually going on in the project at this exact time. The top half is the most important maintenance stuff that we have going on at the moment. So this is denoted by the due date. It's a bit of an old screenshot, but it's, I tried to make the new ones, but the situation is a bit better now. So these are crap, but the new ones would be even more crap. So basically, the due dates, since client is from logistics, and if they have to ship something at a specific moment, it doesn't matter if it's priority 1, priority 2, priority 17, they have to ship something at a specific moment. So that's why they put the due dates, and we also pull from that queue the work that we need. So this is why the top half is important. And these are just some indicators that I put in there for me. And again, this just gives an overview at a glance of what's happening in the project. So if there's more green, then I tend to worry less. If there's more red, I tend to worry more. Simple as that. So to maintenance. This is another dashboard that we use. And there are a couple of interesting things that you would be able to see if you could see the numbers here. And probably guys in the last row cannot. So again, split into two halves. The top half is what's actually on our side as developers, and the bottom half is what's going on client side. And these are just different views of what's going on. So first of all, if we look at what's going on in maintenance on our side as developers, the flow goes really simple. If an issue comes in, it's assigned to me automatically, and everybody knows I'm a lazy guy. I won't work on that issue. So if it stays there, that means that nobody's working on that specific task. And then when the guys have free time, they assign tasks from me to them, and I know that they are actually working on specific task. So this is Kanban in its essence. So I do not assign any tasks to developers because I don't, they may be working on different things. They pull the work themselves. So when they have time, when they have finished working on the previous item, they pull the work and assign it to them. What's really interesting is to see how stuff was distributed on client side. Because when we mapped out the full chain, full scope of the project, we found the bottlenecks. And first of all, they were on our side as developers. And then as we improved the processes on our side, actually the client testing became the biggest problem, the biggest issue. Because business people, as usual, are really, really busy. IT guys from their side are even more busy because they need to cover the business side and they need to cover the IT stuff. So basically, we ended up identifying that there are problems on with testing or with load on the client side. So fortunately, we have a really great client, and we're working on this together to solve the issue. And basically, it involves also streamlining kind of the processes on their side. They also hired additional people, but basically it's just to take the load of business people and of IT people. So the good property of Kanban, if you map the whole workflow, you can identify where there is a problem. And of course, if you've seen the previous talks, if you fix the problem in one area, you usually get a bottleneck in another area because it kind of gets passed on. And the idea is to basically balance the whole system out, and it takes quite a lot of time to do that. But at least you will know where your next bottleneck is. So this is a good reason why to use Kanban. So for change requests, we have another dashboard, and again, split into two parts. This is on developer side, this is on client side. So this is basically the whole product backlog that is known to us. So when the client puts something in an issue tracking system, in this case in Jira, again, these change requests are assigned to me. And then at the beginning of every sprint, we kind of agree who will do what work, and we assign that work to those people. So as you can see, there's some work on different people. And the interesting stuff is that if you are picky and you look at this one, you can see that there are 3 items for one unknown and blurred out person in progress and 2 items for another unknown person. And I got this question asked, well, you said that you need to limit the work in progress and to 1 item, and there are actually 1 guy that's currently working on 3 items. So it's a fair question, and the reason for that is that if you are working on a, I don't know, specific user interface part or specific object in the code, and there are kind of 3 items that you need to fix, then usually you just sort of assign all those issues to yourself simultaneously, because basically you will fix them in a chain. And since if you saw here, these each item is fairly little, so it's 3 hours to 3 days. It doesn't make sense to kind of split them even more. And again, as you can see from the client side, there's a fair amount of changes that they need to do testing on. Any questions about, yes?
The lower part, there is a column waiting information.
Yes.
So could you describe the workflow of that client delivery?
Yeah, so basically first when issues come in, they're open. That means that nobody is working on them, so That's it. Then they go in progress. That means that somebody is actually developing and doing something. Then it's not seen here, there's testing on our side. And then, and basically from each and every step of that workflow, you can put it into waiting information, because you can run into problems before you start actual coding. So when it's when the ticket is open and you need to ask additional questions, you can run into questions when you do the programming. You can run into questions when you do the testing. So then it's in progress in testing. Then we deliver the solution, so they need to deploy it. Then it's their testing. Then it's tested, and yeah, and then it's put into production, which I'm not interested in here, so it's not there. And then also there's, yeah, I forgot, there's also statuses in estimation and estimated. So that's to let client know our estimates and if they approve of them or not. Yes?
If you're using this Kanban notion of running moves forward in the workflows and you close it,
Yeah.
how do you track SLAs against individuals in terms of productivity and basic stuff? Typically you're managing how good somebody is doing. How do you track it if you're waiting for someone to pull from them?
Well, in this case, I do not track person by person because it's a small team, so I more or less kind of know what's going on. But Kanban, there's a beautiful thing about Kanban that there will always be idle time. So there will usually be someone that's sitting there and waiting for an item to come, just to kind of cover everything up. But in terms of SLA, again, self-promotion, you can see which from the SLA tool that we've developed, you can see which person has been working on which item for how long. And from that, if you need, you can create a report and do the graph from there.
What do you mean by working on it? Aren't they not working on it until someone takes it off them?
Yes, you are. But the problem, again, the good thing with that is I mentioned an example earlier. For example, if the programmers produce more and more changes, and there's a development on testing side, and instead of programmers either doing more changes to kind of overload the tester even more, instead of programmers going for a smoke, what Kanban encourages is to programmers get with the testers and solve the bottleneck problem. So they're not waiting, they're not smoking. Maybe there's some sort of deployment guy at the end that's actually waiting for the whole deployment to come. But for guys up in the workflow, it's usually not a problem. Did I answer your question?
In a way, yes.
Okay. Yes.
So from the process that you have described, it looks like auto factory where everyone has to start the shift at the same time and finish at the same time. Otherwise, you will get a lot of idle time, isn't it?
Well, it sort of is like factory, yeah. It's not. Again, it's the essence of Kanban to make the flow as smooth as possible. So it's in any other case, I mean, if you use a typical kind of workflow, I don't know what testers were doing when I was developing something in a waterfall project. So they were sitting somewhere in a dark room with their ears covered, not to know what they need to test. So, or working on another project. So in this case, it's to streamline the whole workflow, and if some item fails, then of course the system is suboptimal, and you need to fix it. The beauty of it is that you see immediately what is failing, and you go there and you fix it.
Yes, but what I mean is that it doesn't allow for, let's say flexible hours, different time zones, and so on.
It does, because it doesn't matter. For example, if you're a developer, you can write your code at 2 o'clock at night, and then the tester comes in the morning and tests the stuff. So it's no more problems than in a usual project setup, because if a tester then has some questions, then he has to wait until 2 o'clock in the night when the developer shows up. So in that case, it's not more of a problem here than in any other setup. It's again, this is the thing of not fail fast, fail early, but identifying problems early. Yes?
So there's a single queue where developers pull the task items, and Steam usually consists of multiple levels,
Yeah.
skills, expertise. So how do you assure that they pick the right items? Because if early on the junior picks some really large and complicated problem, or some dedicated developer not yet used this task.
I don't manage it. It works. It works. The team self-manages. So if there's a junior developer, he usually knows the complexity. If he's not the kind of working for a week or two, he usually kind of can predict complexity of a certain issue, more or less. And if he gets stuck, again, there's a bottleneck in that specific area. So the senior developer comes in and helps to solve the problem. And I really don't see the kind of the big issue with not letting junior developers, I don't know, express themselves. If you want to deal with a hard issue, and it's not a matter of time for me. If there's no due date, if there's no deadline, knock yourself out. Go ahead, do that stuff. You will get better. Yeah. Yeah, but then again, from this picture, I can see that something is approaching the SLA deadline, and I go in and say, okay, I see that there's a problem. Let's get together and try to solve it. So that's when the senior developer goes to a junior developer and they try to solve the problem. And sometimes they do fail because the junior developer took so much time that we run overtime. But I mean, yeah, I actually had the same question asked, because you know that you have in a project these problem areas where nobody wants to come in, and then you have the kind of Chuck Norris of the project coming in and saying, I will do this. No, basically, I see a problem, and it goes like we have sprints that are week long. If I see the problem that stays there for too long, I say, okay, guys, this is not going to solve itself, so somebody needs to do it. And then sooner or later, usually when they need to go out for dinner, somebody says, okay, I'll do it. And it's not the only one Chuck Norris guy in the project. And in this specific project, there's why I like the junior developers. There's a really good junior developer, and usually he just says, okay, I'll try, and he just does something for 2 weeks, and I don't know, and but he digs up really good stuff, and he kind of exercises his brains. Okay, so I'm kind of running out of time. So just to sum everything up, so changes and improvements. So what I've found from my experience is that maintenance and changes are organized differently, and you need to organize them differently because they are specific, and you cannot kind of slap the same old projects, the same old approach on everything. And in some cases, probably the Kanban and Scrum approach doesn't work also. But you need to find your specific tool. Then there's an increased, the side product of this is there's an increased understanding about priorities and sequence of work. So there's no question we have something planned in the sprint. There are due dates, there are priorities, so everybody knows how to work on them, and they usually get together and self-organize to do that. Then, really good thing is that there are visible bottlenecks. So as you can spot problems really early and you can deal with them. And another thing, when you are doing one thing at a time, you can really concentrate on what you're actually doing rather than kind of switching contexts. And that makes people really, really happy. And in the end, this is the link to a book I was showing earlier. It's free. I think you need to register, but the slides will be online. And you can check this out. I really recommend. It's a really easy read, really short book. Thank you, and I made the time. Yeah.
Yes, you're on time.